Welcome back, my friends, to AA Recovery Interviews. I'm your host, Howard L., and I'm an alcoholic. Sober since January 1st, 1988, one day at a time. I'm grateful you've joined us. AA Recovery Interviews is the podcast where Alcoholics Anonymous members from around the world share their extraordinary stories of experience, strength, and hope. There are more than 160 interviews in this podcast series, all of which you can enjoy on aarecoveryinterviews.com and all podcast apps. My guest on today's show is Mike J., whose qualification for AA was honed by years of alcohol and drug abuse. Like so many others in our program, Mike's experience with alcohol started as a young teenager who drank to overcome feelings of being less than, despite his being raised by his grandparents in a strict but loving home. Mike's grandfather was the local minister, and any abhorrent behavior Mike engaged in was quickly and harshly dealt with, thus maintaining Mike's dutiful position as the pastor's son. Of course, Mike continued to drink throughout high school, and later during his job as a machinist. Finding that his acumen for fixing machinery meant good earnings and steady employment, he kept up his alcohol consumption. But Mike's ability to function at his job, despite heavy drinking evenings and weekends, only delayed his inevitable confrontation with his worsening disease of alcoholism. Adding crack cocaine to the mixture only accelerated the deterioration of his career, marriage, and personal relations. Facing the grim realities of his situation and a bottom that likely would have turned deadly, Mike had a moment of clarity in which he was able to check himself into an inpatient rehab facility. He emerged 90 days later as a beaten but newly teachable man who was ready to continue the AA meetings he'd experienced in the 3 months of rehab. Finding an AA club and a sponsor, Mike attended as many as 3 meetings a day and worked the 12 steps with enthusiasm. He got involved in service work and sponsorship along the way, and today is the product of 34 years of continuous sobriety. Mike is one of those people who demonstrates gratitude and humility as a steady member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I think you'll find his story to be both inspirational and encouraging. So please enjoy the next 60 minutes of this episode of AA Recovery Interviews with my good friend and AA brother, Mike J.
I'm Mike. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
I'm so glad that you were able to do this today, to do the interview. You and I have been talking about this for quite a while, trying to get our schedules coordinated, and finally I think we've gotten the opportunity to do this. We are sitting in a club that you and I frequent several times a week. We've gotten to know each other. It seems like we met just yesterday, but it's been years now, hasn't it?
Yes. I've been around here 4 years now.
Does that seem like it's gone by pretty quick for you?
It really does.
Does it?
Yeah.
In what ways?
Well, from, the beginning to now, it just seems like everything is just going, at a fast pace.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I'm learning more and more.
Mm-hmm.
But the longer that I'm in here, I see that, hey, it's a lot that I didn't know, that I hadn't realized.
Yeah.
And it's only by coming, to these meetings and hearing people share that I can relate.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing that just within a short period of time you can get that feeling. That's a good feeling to have, that you can relate. I know I felt that way too. But you've been sober quite a while now, haven't you?
Yes, it's 34 years.
34 years. What's your sobriety date?
December 3rd, 1991.
Wow, so you're coming up on a birthday in another month or so, huh?
Yes.
Wow. When you first got sober, how did you envision your life 34 years later? If you had to look down the road when you were 34 years younger to this day, where did you think you would be, and what do you think you would be doing?
To be honest, I really was lost.
Uh-huh.
I didn't have an idea, a clue. It so happened that 34 years ago, I was at the age of 34 when I got, into this program, when I got sober.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just amazing now. beyond my wildest dreams what it would be. All I knew is I needed to do something different. And I didn't even realize then that doing something different gives you a different result.
So doing something different than what you were doing, I'm assuming that the what you were doing part of it wasn't good, which is why you wanted to change. What was there about what was going on 34 years ago that made you decide to go into AA or to stop drinking?
Well, I I always drank, I did drugs, and a lot of it was mainly just pure pressure. I wanted to be in the in crowd.
Yeah.
And, I was raised up in a religious family. And, by that, I became the black sheep of the family. And, I just wanted to be in the in crowd. I wanted people to like me. I always had a fear of, being disliked, this and that. And I just wanted to be a part of. And it was just happened to be a wrong part of. And, I can't say so much the wrong part. I know things I was doing, it wasn't, legal or right. But everything I learned it from somebody. You know, it was taught whether it was right or wrong.
Yeah.
I learned it from somebody because I didn't invent anything. So,
Yeah.
I just caught negative, vibes from it.
So if you wanted to fit in, you'd have to do what the people who were already in were doing, whether it was right or wrong, legal, illegal, or whatever else. Do you remember from your childhood home and your family of origin, did you feel that way about not fitting in? Did you feel that way in your family from the time you were a little kid, or is it something that happened over the years?
Well, it was from a little kid, really. My grandparents adopted me. And although my biological father was my grandparents' son, it just so happened my mother and father, biological mother and father, they were married. The only thing was they wasn't married to each other.
Oh, no.
And my grandparents saw what the future, might be. And they adopted me, which was a blessing for me, not knowing at that time. That's really what happened. And I just, I was confused always.
This happened from the time you were a baby, you were adopted?
I came out the hospital straight to my grandmother's
Straight
house.
to your granddad. So this is your mother's mother?
No, my
Your
father's.
father's mother. How did your mother, what kind of feedback have you gotten over the years about how your mother felt about giving you up as a baby?
Well, it was even a blessing for her. Matter of fact, when I came from the hospital to my grandmother's, my mother did also went to my grandmother's. My father went to the service about 3 days after I was born. And, growing up, well, I knew he was my biological father. My grandparents always taught me, this is your mother, this is your father, and hey, to love them. But at the same time, I was still raised by my grandparents. Not only me, my father, my, other siblings, cousins. It was a house that grandmother raised just about all the relatives.
That sounds like a really interesting experience.
Yes, it was. And it was confusing to me.
In what ways?
After I got older, I I wondered about adoption. Why did they give me up? Or they didn't want me, or what was it? I just, couldn't understand.
Now, was your mother there at the time that you were wondering that?
No, no. She was already gone back home, but I would be allowed to go over to my mother's house, on weekends. And hey, I was taught to, love her as my mother.
As your mother.
Yes.
That's an interesting arrangement that you go to see your mother, but you live with the grandparents. Did she have additional children that were step brothers and sisters to you?
Yes. She had two that were older than me.
And did they live with her, or did they come live with your grandmother?
No, they lived with her. Hey, I was taught to love them, as a family.
Yeah, you've mentioned that a couple times now, taught to love. Sounds like your grandmother was a loving influence in your life. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yes, definitely so.
And when it came to the home itself, the environment that you were raised in, was there anything within that environment that would predict future issues and problems for you? Or what was that home like when you were growing up?
Growing up, it was always a positive outlook from my grandparents. They would say that, hey, you're gonna, you can be anything that you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
Go to school, get education. My grandfather was a pastor of the church.
Mm-hmm.
And coming up in the religious realm, being Baptist, they always thought that I was going to be a minister.
Mm.
Well, that didn't sit too hot with me because I, didn't want to be a minister. Matter of fact, I really hated to go to church. By him being the pastor, we would have to be there all the time.
Uh-huh.
And so I was at church, wow, lots of times during the week. I didn't have that much of a childhood, just playing with the other kids and stuff. But I had my share. And I just, I didn't understand why I had to go all the time.
You're the pastor's grandson.
Yes.
So there's a certain standard that you had to maintain, certain way of acting, certain decorum that you had as a child that fit the image of a grandchild of a pastor.
Supposedly,
So
yes.
supposedly. Was that expected of your other siblings and half siblings?
Basically, yeah. Because, like I said, they were raised in the house until they moved away. By being the grandson slash son, I was the youngest. And all the other siblings, they were, adults. They had their own places and moved away. My biological father was the fourth from his parents' 7 children. So they were all older. I was, the child.
I wondered whether the spread in age difference had any impact on the relationships with those people.
I didn't have much of an impact except just being loved. They were like my uncles and aunts. And then on the other end, they were brothers and sisters.
So it sounds like you were loved as a child, but there was some confusion as to your own identity within the family.
True.
That must have been kind of tough when you were a kid.
Yeah, that's what it was. I just didn't have, like you say, my own identity. I didn't know what it was or what to, expect. Mainly, I was seen as the pastor's son,
Oh, the pastor's son.
the youngest one.
What did you know of alcohol around your house when you were a kid? Was there alcoholism within the immediate family or in the extended family? What did that look like when you were a kid?
It was alcoholism in the immediate family and the extended family. One, my grandfather, the pastor, he drank. I never saw him drunk or anything. But they, would express to me that in his earlier days, how it was. He had a sister that drank, well, basically an alcoholic, a drunk. And, it was confusion there, but she didn't stay at the house, but she was, known drunk.
Yeah.
Cousins that were, drinkers. And basically all of kids, I mean, they drank. I had one uncle that didn't drink, but everybody else drank. But they wasn't, drunkards or anything. They drank and maintained jobs and lives and everything.
There was a lot of drinking going on around you, but nobody was exhibiting the classic alcoholic drunkard behavior.
Correct.
So what kind of image did that give you of what alcoholism or drunkardness might be when you were a kid? If someone had said, what does a drunk look like to you, Mike? Or what would an alcoholic look like to you? What would you have said?
Basically, a drunkard to me was a person that drank and fell out and, violent and this and that, just acting uncivilized.
But you weren't seeing that amongst the people in your own family.
No, I wasn't.
Yeah, that's interesting. When did you take your first drink on your own accord? I mean, a lot of times kids are given sips of things and that, but when it comes to actually drinking a drink or a beer or whatever from the time you were a certain age, how old were you and what did that look like?
I was young. I would say at least 12, 11 or 12. Really, to be honest, they told me that as a baby, I cried so much that they would put beer in my bottle and the juice to, make me go to sleep. So this alcoholism could have been on me as a baby, really. And, if I'm not mistaken, I believe I even tried that on my daughter when she was little. I'm not sure, but I believe I did.
Well, as a parent, of course, sometimes you're at the absolute end of your rope, and even the most irrational thought or behavior makes sense when you're sleep deprived and you're just you're frazzled.
Yeah.
So you were about 12. That would have put you right about the end of grammar school, beginning of middle school.
Yes.
When you drank, were you doing it with other people? You mentioned earlier about wanting to fit in. What did that look like when you were 12 years old and 13 years old, drinking for the first time? And how did it make you feel?
Well, I did it with other people, to fit in. We would even do it before school, and just want to be grown. And I never really got drunk because I was scared. I wanted to be in the in crowd, but I knew I had to come home. And, that prevented a lot of things because I was always taught, right from wrong. But at the same time, I did my thing. I did, I did a lot of wrong. And I thought I was slick because I never got in trouble. I never got in trouble with the law or anything. And I just thought I was lucky. I was slick. Being the pastor's son, maybe, hey, somebody's watching over me. I just didn't know. I just did things out of the spur of the moment. I never really planned, a lot of actions that are taken, but I did them.
Now, was being a pastor's son or grandson a pass to getting out of trouble, or were you never in the kind of trouble that affected your father, your grandfather?
I was never in the trouble that affected him, but one time. But far as all the others, it wasn't being, having to pass anything. Because at that time, in that era, growing up, the neighbors watched you. Everybody around, the neighborhood knew you, knew the family, and they had permission to discipline you also. So, I had to keep a low profile.
So you grew up in a village where the other folks in the community would discipline you and watch over you and notice your behavior on an ongoing basis. What were some of the consequences that you encountered as a result of drinking in middle school? I'm assuming it went into high school as well. What kind of consequences went on? You mentioned you weren't in trouble with the law, but the consequences with regard to when your grandparents found out and did something about it, or when your community found out and did something about it.
It was always like if I was caught doing something by a neighbor or something, I would definitely rather get the punishment from them versus them telling my grandparents what I've done. Because I didn't want those consequences.
They'd be much worse if your
Oh, yes.
get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
What were the circumstances under which those things occurred?
It would be devastating. I mean, I don't know if it was called in the olden days or what, but discipline wasn't necessarily with a belt, no standing in the corner or nothing. You had to go and get your own switch or whatever. And, you know, hey, I couldn't understand that. Why would I want to go get a switch to get my behind whooped? But, you know, still being a child, being a kid,
Yeah.
yeah, you follow directions. I didn't get disciplined but a few times. I kind of caught on quick
Yeah.
because I always thought he was kind of loco or something.
Oh boy. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
When I drank for the first time, there was a certain effect that I got that made me want to do it again. Also, early on when I drank, I got very, very sick, which would portend not doing it again, but I did it again to chase the first feeling. When you drank for the first time and subsequent times, how did it make you feel? Did you get sick? Did you black out? What did that look like at the time?
I didn't really get sick. I grew up being around older guys, and I, you know, would drink with them. I was just paying attention, trying to learn how to drink, how to learn, trying to learn how to be this way or that way. I was always told I was mature for my age, and I had a car when I was in the ninth grade, and that was something special to me. So I thought I was on the biggity, big shot end. But I never really per se got drunk. I was considered always the designated driver. I just enjoyed it the best way that I could. And I was told that I could drink a person under the table and this and that. Well, I wasn't doing all that drinking. I didn't like beer that much. So the alcohol that I was drinking, it was mixed with soda or whatever. More soda than the alcohol.
So you had a reputation that was actually bigger than the reality of what was going on.
True. That's so true. And I had to keep that reputation up.
Well, yeah, I can imagine. That certainly sets the stage nicely for functional alcoholism as we get older. We're able to function in a way that looks like we've got it all together, even though we're having all kinds of issues on the side. Now, the groups that you hung out with while you were drinking early on and in high school, was there a certain crowd that you hung with that drank or engaged in other behaviors?
Well, I thought it was fine until the other things started happening, far as marijuana and, the drugs. And when that started, things started changing.
How old were you when that started?
It was possibly 15, 16. I, again, want to be with the in crowd. I tried some of the things, and the marijuana, I liked it.
I did too.
Yeah, I liked it. I like drinking. I mean, anything that I did, I enjoyed it to the best of my ability. And I just had an addictive personality. If it was good to me, hey, let's go with it.
You mentioned earlier on about you didn't really have any trouble with the law. Did the groups that you were hanging with in high school, did they get into trouble?
Yes.
And you just happened to escape it, or did you get in trouble with them?
No, I didn't get in trouble with them. I would find ways out.
You were the designated driver, so you
Yeah.
couldn't possibly be the drunk one.
No, and I did a lot of, escaping. Again, I knew right from wrong. That didn't mean that I did everything right. I did everything wrong. But I knew when the situation was headed to trouble, I couldn't let the trouble get on me because I would have to answer to it from my grandparents. I would either get my car taken away. I had some privileges that I just I just couldn't afford to lose.
And those would get taken away if you were,
Oh, definitely.
yeah, if you were caught, whatever.
Yeah.
Can you walk us down the road a little bit from the time you were in high school to the years after, what your life looked like as you continued to drink and use drugs and how that all unfolded for you?
Well, right out of high school, I became a machinist. And during this time, I considered myself really in a good situation because my father, my biological father, and my grandfather, and several of my uncles, they all worked for the railroad. And that was pretty good paying job, in the black community. I was a machinist when I came out of high school, and I made more money per hour than they made at the railroad. I thought I was smarter. I thought I was, in some ways better. It just corrupted my head. That's what really happened. I was smoking marijuana then, I was drinking then, and I had even started selling drugs on the job. Even there, I would make more money selling drugs than I made per hour at the job.
And this is before the drug testing and everything, right?
Yes, yes. My uncles and grandfather, they retired from the railroad. Years of service with the railroad. And I stayed in machinist for about 6 or 7 years.
Now, were you in Houston at this time? Where were you living?
Yes, I was born and raised in Houston.
What kind of effect did the fact that you were a machinist making more money than what your uncles and your relatives were in, how did that affect your relationships with them? And did that in any way create the desire to want to drink more or use more?
No, it didn't. It didn't really affect that I know of because I was still at home, and my grandmother would ask me always, "Are you putting up money for a rainy day?" And I couldn't understand that. I save for a rainy day. She would ask me, "Well, don't you think you ought to give me $100 a week or every 2 weeks? When you get paid?" And that upset me. I don't know if it was because of the drinking or the drugs, but I couldn't understand why I have to give you money. Your husband gives you money and this and that. Just not having no thoughts of nothing but me.
Well, you were living on the dole, right? So you were living at home with them. When she asked for that $100, was it to put it up for you, or was it to use for your kind of like your room and board, your share of the household expenses?
Basically, it was to put up for me, and I didn't realize it. Didn't have a clue or idea of why you need the $100 or whatever. So I got upset and moved out, got my own place.
How old were you when you did that?
I was in my 20s. I don't know exactly, but one of the biggest mistakes I ever made. Yeah.
We'll be right back. My friends, if you're enjoying AA Recovery interviews, I invite you to check out my latest audiobook, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. This is the word-for-word, cover-to-cover reading of the first edition of the Big Book, published in 1939. It's a relaxing yet meaningful and engaging way to listen to the Big Book anytime, any place. Have a free listen at Audible, iTunes, or Amazon. While you're there, search for my other audiobook, Lost Stories of the Big Book, 30 original stories from the first and or second editions missing from the third and fourth editions of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's an engaging audiobook that brings these stories to life for AA members who've never seen them. These timeless testimonials were originally cut to make room for newer stories in the third and fourth editions. But their vitally important messages of hope are as meaningful today as they were when they were first published. Many listeners will hear these stories for the very first time. It's also available from Amazon as a Kindle book or in paperback if you'd like to read along. You're going to love it. And we're back. How old did your grandmother live to be?
She was 86, I believe.
And how long had you been sober when she passed?
When she passed, I hadn't been sober between 8 and 9 years.
So by that time in your sobriety, you would have had the opportunity to have gone back and noticed all the things that she did for you and how she felt about you, and kind of contrast that with your behavior at the time. You know, she wanted to put money aside for you. You wanted to move out over that. It sounds to me like it was a great opportunity to make amends. Is that something that happened for you while you were in the program?
It was a great opportunity to make amends, which I made somewhat of amends. I hadn't gotten to the point in my recovery that, I knew all about it. I dealt with it in the proper way. But I look back, hey, I wish I had. I mean, she was, so precious to me. I was precious to her. She loved me. I loved her so much.
So she had the opportunity to see and know the benefit of your being sober for 8 or 9 years before she passed.
Oh, yes, yes.
Is it fair to say that that was a gift or a restitution to her for the way you might have treated her when you were out there?
Yes, I do. I do believe so. You know, when she got sick, and I was married at the time, but I discussed with my wife that I need to go and take care of my grandmother. Being married, still living on the other side of town, I came back to my grandmother's, and I was there day and night. I wasn't working. I stayed there, changed the milk and, different things that she had. It was a kind of like a sense of relief. It could have even been amends that I didn't realize that I was doing. But I knew that, hey, I did it not so much out the kindness of my heart. I did it because I felt I was obligated to do it.
Yeah. Those are the kind of obligations that we learn when we come into the program and start working the steps, the obligations, the accountability. For me, most of that stuff kind of came out as I worked the steps, and then the need to go make the amends was viewed a little bit differently, where I could understand what a living amend really meant, and that is changing my behavior to the people who I know and love. So that happened when you were 8 or 9 years sober. If we could just back up here for a few minutes to look at your years leading up to when you ultimately came into AA, what those intervening years look like with regard to marriage and other issues that led up to your having to come into AA.
You know, looking back, mathematics was a big deal for me in school. And dealing with machinery work, mathematics was important. And I was pretty good at it. And I learned to work on these certain machines that the average guy, well, at that job, couldn't do, but I could do. And for some reason, I always felt special about that.
So you were a specialist.
Yes, yes. And I did a, did a job that this machine had been idle for years because they couldn't find anyone to run it. Well, I had never run it before either, but I always felt like if you teach me something, you don't have to teach me but once.
That's an admirable quality to have, too.
Yeah, I really do. Well, if you show me the proper way or the basic way, all those shortcuts and everything that I can find on my own, and that's the way it was with, in life coming up. The same way, when my friends would get in trouble, I would sense that it was coming. So I need to go the other way at this time. We can get back together later, but what you're doing is you finna get in some trouble.
So that's how you evaded trouble, was you had this sense of being able to know when it was coming?
Yeah. I enjoyed being around people. I could talk with, some anybody, the good guys, the thugs, all of them. I could relate with them in some kind of way that they would always want to talk to me. Like I said, I grew up with older guys, and I was taught the ins and outs, the slick ways, and this and that. But I never had courage or balls enough to, you know, just go on by myself with it. It was like being a follower instead of a leader.
Did you want to be a leader at that time, or were you content being a follower?
I was content being a follower because being a leader, I had to be strong. Well, see, to be honest, I was always fearful of just about everything. Although I did it, I was scared as hell. I didn't want to be talked about as being, a pushover, this and that, but yeah, I was always fearful. My grandfather instilled that fear in me because I was scared as a child. It wasn't, we didn't do any talking back or whatever. We couldn't even express, you know, our feelings necessarily.
Yeah.
What he said goes. It was simple as that. Yeah, yeah. I mean, if he called me, it wasn't no "I'm coming" or "Yes, sir." If he called me, I need to be standing there by the time he finished calling me. You know, if he wanted a glass of water, I need to bring the glass of water, and I need to be standing there till he finished to see if he wanted more or what.
I get that. What did the alcohol and drugs do to that fear?
It changed the way I felt
About the fear itself or the outcome of what would happen?
about the fear itself. It changed it at that time. Looking back, could have been some of the reasons why I did things. Like we say in here, to change the way we feel. And I'm sure I did a lot of it because of it.
So you were working as a machinist. You were obviously earning enough money to support yourself. You mentioned a wife at some point. What did those years look like with regard to your drinking and using drugs?
Very, I would say toxic. I didn't do the right thing. I would pay bills sometimes I wouldn't. Stay out, womanizing, doing just about everything I shouldn't have been. As being, a couple or married, I didn't necessarily care.
We usually don't, do we?
No, I really didn't. I cared about me and what I was doing. The real selfishness.
People around us are the ones that suffer the most when all we care about is ourselves, isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah. So, marriage, children, how were those all affected?
I'm sure they were affected. Kids not getting proper nourishments. The wife not being happy because I'm not home. The normal things. I didn't know what normalcy was. I knew I didn't want to raise my family like I was raised, but it seems to always come out that way that's what I was doing. Matter of fact, that's all I knew to do is what I was taught.
So, you didn't want it that way, but nothing in your behavior affected that want.
Didn't affect it much at all. I'll have some good days. Hey, the family, we'd go eat. We would do this. The kid's birthday, and we'd have a little party, this and that. But I didn't, that wasn't, it didn't faze me at all.
So, you mentioned you got here in your early 30s. So, by the time you got here, what did your family look like? And what did your relationship with your wife look like? Were things unfolding quickly for you, or was it a gradual decline?
It was a gradual decline. I mean, it was a big difference. In the beginning of getting sober, I felt I was doing it for her, doing it for my kids. I was tired of hearing why you do this or why you do that. And, I said, well, I'm gonna make a change. I'm gonna do something. I'm gonna get sober for my wife.
In my personal case, there were certain, I don't know if you'd call them ultimatums. My wife was a lot more subtle than that. But basically, I knew pretty clearly that if I didn't stop, the marriage was going to end at some point relatively soon, given my behavior at the time. When you look back at that gradual decline, were you receiving feedback from your family, from your wife, that you ought to stop or things are going to end, or you ought to stop or else? Or did she just stick with you and with your behavior until you decided to stop?
She stuck with me and a lot of my behavior, until I decided to stop. She was a blessing in disguise to me that I didn't understand or realize.
In what ways?
By mainly sticking around. In other words, she loved me when I didn't love myself or necessarily her. I was in love, but I didn't know what love, real love was. My grandmother would always tell me, she's the best thing, for you. You need to marry that girl. Well, I didn't want to be married. I never wanted to be married. She proposed to me. And after I told my grandmother we would get married, oh, it was such, a thrill for her. But my grandmother bugged me about that for a long time.
When did you turn the corner on that belief and want to be married? How long was it when you finally got to the point where you said, yeah, I want to be married now?
To be honest, hell, I don't know if I've gotten to that point yet.
Don't play this for your
No,
wife, whatever you do. Don't play this for your wife.
no, but I've learned to love her and I've learned to accept. See, I didn't know nothing about this program acceptance and none of this. But I do. I love her and she loves me and I've accepted marriage. I never had the thought of wanting to be married.
How long you guys been together?
We've been together for 44 years. It was
That's amazing.
October 13th of this year.
Congratulations on that.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah, that's the best answer to that. So what did the final days look like for you before you got into AA, leading up to your walking through the doors? And had you tried to stop before and failed and tried again? Tell me about that.
Well, stopping drinking and stopping smoking marijuana, I didn't have a problem. I would stop, periodically,
Yeah.
times. But a thing called crack cocaine came out, and that was a big turning point in my life. I tried that, I got on that, and it was a brand new ballgame. It changed everything.
How long before you got sober did you start using crack?
I may have done crack about 4 or 5 years.
So those hastened the demise. Those
Yeah.
led up quickly to the cliff that you went off.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It fast paced, and I knew then that this not gonna last. And I'm gonna have to do something. I wasn't working at the time, and my wife was working. She had good insurance and this and that. I would see these commercials on television about the crack and people smoking crack, and they would have this certain commercial with the egg frying in the pan. This is what's doing to your brain.
Right.
And everywhere I went, I would see this commercial. I cut the TV off, and the commercial be on the radio, and it was just driving me crazy. And I didn't know anything of getting help or even asking for help. But I did hear on a commercial about if you have a problem, if you think you have a problem, you know. So I called the hotline and told them that, hey, smoke crack and I want to stop. And so they interviewed me over the phone and do you have insurance and this and that? And I didn't have a job. I didn't have insurance. But I knew my wife had insurance. And she had Blue Cross Blue Shield. And I stole her card out of her purse and gave the numbers to the lady. And she said, well, this will do it. So that next day, I told my wife I had a job interview. Would she take me over here at this certain location? And she took me. And it was the place at the recovery in Kingwood. And I told her I could get home. I'd catch a bus, but I'm going on a job interview. It's like her eyes lit up. Oh, wow, you're going to get a job? Hey, okay. But it wasn't a job. I was checking myself into a rehab.
So she had to find that out at some point.
Yes, because when I went, check myself in, I actually thought it was possibly get a shot, a 3-day deal. I didn't have an idea. All I know is I wanted to quit doing what I was doing.
So you went into an inpatient facility. How long were you there?
3 months.
3 months. And when your wife did I'm assuming she found out right away that what you were really doing.
Yeah, I believe they called her that second day or whatever and explained to her what was happening, what was what.
And they were okay taking whatever insurance you had at that point.
Yeah.
Because by then it would seem to me your wife or the facility would have noticed the fact that her coverage might or might not include you. But I guess common law, all sorts of things must have entered into it, huh?
Yes, everything into it, because I knew my name wasn't on her insurance, deal, and at that particular time, we were just common law. We wasn't, licensed married. We was, in other words, they called it shacking.
Yeah,
Yeah,
still common law in the
yeah,
state of
yeah,
Texas.
common
Yeah,
law.
sure.
And for some unknown reason, it wasn't a problem with any of that.
Sounds like a God deal.
Yeah, by His grace,
Wow.
I realize all of that now. I realize even in my addiction back in the days, God has always been watching over me.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah.
Sounds like it. So you're in there for 90 days. Usually people get out at 30. What was going on at 30 days that made them say, we'd like to keep you a while longer?
I don't know if it was, if I was such a bad case or what, but I, uh, I didn't, I didn't have tremors. I didn't have the DTs or whatever, let's say it. I became willing then to get all in, in the program.
So you were living in an environment for 3 months where you literally cannot use, or were you exposed to AA during that 90-day period?
Yes.
Did they bring it into the hospital or did you go out?
They brought it into the hospital and we went out, I believe, once a week.
What did you think about AA being while you were still there in that inpatient setting?
I was always, like I say, fearful. And I didn't understand the meetings and different things. But we went as a group and I learned to be quiet and listen.
Sometimes the weakest link between inpatient and even IOP, outpatient, is unless the handoff to AA is really strong, they get out of treatment and they go right back. What was it that you heard about AA while you were in treatment that made you want to do AA after you got out? Did they say something to you or did you have a realization? What was there about AA at the end of the road as a new beginning for you?
That's a good point. And the main thing that I can say is in the treatment center, I was taught, and it really hit me that we were like sections off into threes, and the counselor would always say, "You three, guy in the middle, look to the left and look to the right. And out of the three of y'all, two of you not gonna make it." That scared the hell out of me.
That sounds like a scary thought.
And I always wanted to be the one that made it. I took that to heart. I still take it to heart today because I didn't know nothing about AA. I didn't know about a disease. Hell, all I knew is you stop drinking, you won't get drunk. And that's still the case today. If you don't drink, you can't get drunk.
That's the binary element of the program. You either drink or you don't, and you can either get drunk or not get drunk by virtue of whether or not you drink. Now, was that the first and last time that you did any kind of treatment, or had you any experience with relapses along the way?
No, I haven't. I went to the one treatment center. And when I got out, I went to my first meeting and I got my desire chip. And that's the only desire chip that I've had to have as of yet.
That's great. And you've got 34 years of long-term sobriety built on the foundation that you put together. The thing you said about, only 1 out of 3 are going to make it, that's a real sobering point. Did you ever run into any of those people who you were an inpatient with in your early years of AA?
I ran into one. He hadn't relapsed, but he had stopped going to AA. he took the religious approach of it because his father was a pastor also. That's the route that he took. I know I hadn't talked to him in over 20 years. I wouldn't know.
What were your early weeks and months and even years like in the program of AA for you?
It was steady. I went, they suggested, 90 meetings in 90 days. Well, I'm sure I went to more than 90 because I would go to meetings 2 to 3 times a day. And in the beginning, I wasn't working, so I didn't have a problem going to meetings. I had to walk to meetings. I lived just in the city in Houston, and it happened to be a club not far from me. And I had to walk to meetings, and I would get a ride back. But I was interested in going to, being at meetings.
Well, going to that many meetings a day early on says a lot about your desire and commitment to want to do something different. How long did it take you to get a sponsor? Did you start working the steps right away?
It could have been 2 weeks, between 2 weeks a month when I first, got in that program at that particular group. Then I didn't ask the guy to be a sponsor. The guy told me he was going to be my sponsor.
That made it easier, didn't it?
Yeah, but I wondered why he wanted me, because he was seemingly the meanest, asshole it was. And why, why me? But I went along with it, and hey, he became a real good friend.
Is he still your sponsor to this day?
No, I hadn't seen him or talked with him in a while. About 10 years afterwards, the club dispersed, and people went certain ways, different ways, and he got a divorce from his wife, and he had a lot of issues going on, and we just stopped talking. I got a job and was working regular and wasn't going to meetings for almost 5 years.
You weren't going to meetings for 5 years?
Wasn't going to meetings. After a 7-year, continuous program, I got a job through one of the guys at the meetings, and I started working, and man, I was working these crazy hours. I didn't have transportation at the time, and I was a dry drunk.
The disease loves that. When you're
Yeah.
busy and you don't have transportation, it'll come up with all kinds of great reasons why it's okay that you're not going to a meeting.
Yeah. But all of the time, for some unknown reason, it was through the grace of my higher power.
Yeah, most people don't stay sober who stop going to meetings. Every now and then you'll hear about it. And of course, in settings like this, I hear about it because people talk about being sober for a number of years, and then they become a dry drunk, and then they drink. So the first 7 years, you were all in, you were doing what you needed to do. The next 5 years, your meetings dropped off. What happened at 5 years that made you reemerge into AA?
Well, I started feeling different. I started reminiscing on some old behavior, old thoughts, stinking thinking. And from what I learned earlier, that wasn't good for me. You haven't drank, so you don't have to get a desire chip, but you need to get back in your program. I didn't even know that it was a difference in sobriety and recovery. Hey, I need to get back into recovery.
So retrospectively, you know now the difference between being dry and being sober.
Definitely.
So at 12 years, you get back into the program. What was your relationship like with the people, the fellowship? Because sometimes not being very well connected or having a close fellowship makes it a lot easier to not go to those meetings because I don't know the people as well as I should, or it's okay that I don't go, nobody will miss me. What was your relationship like with the people in the program?
My relationship was great. It really was. I came in and I was welcome like I had never left.
Huh.
You know, I hear people that relapse say that, you know, after not drinking so long and you go back to drinking, it's like
You never stopped.
yeah, you never stopped. It was like that when I came back in the program. That particular day, it wasn't like that, but it got like that so quickly because it was like I'm at home. I'm back with my people.
Did that feeling match the feeling you had in your first 7 years, or was it a new feeling entirely?
It was a matching feeling. Yeah, it was a matching feeling because they welcomed me when I first got in that program, and here they welcomed me.
During your sobriety, the 34 years, what did you learn within that time about yourself when it comes to being sober, just being dry, getting involved in the program again?
It's a big difference when you're not in touch, when you're not attending these meetings, when you're not practicing what you so-called preaching. It's a big difference. You know, you have that short-term memory. You forget things that you hear in these meetings. And it was a time, you know, I would say, well, I go to meetings and the guys say the same thing over and over and over and over. My mind, I need to hear the same thing sometime over and over and over.
Don't we?
And it was beneficial to me. It was possibly being said for me and to me. And I need to hear that. Today, I hear in meetings, the things people share. It's like, okay, you've been clean and sober 34 years, and some of the things you hear in these meetings today, it overwhelms you, it wows you. Seems like I ought to be in an advanced class of AA, but hey, I'm still learning every day. And when I don't learn something, it's a wasted day. I'm learning something each and every day.
It's almost like we're approaching the finish line, and yet the disease is telling us we're still at the starting line.
Yeah.
Isn't that weird? Kind of a weird thing.
Yeah.
I've seen you over the last number of years in this meeting, and I've seen you be of service to other people and the group. How do you feel about service as it relates to your comfortability in the program and your desire to be a part of the fellowship?
Service is good for me. I take it as what I was taught in there. If I give service, if I'm service to someone or something, it comes back. You know, this program, you people gave it to me freely. And for me to keep it, I have to give it away freely. But for me to give it away freely, I got to have something to give away.
Yeah, you got to be practicing the principles in all your
Yes.
affairs.
If I'm not coming to meetings, if I'm not learning, understanding what this is about, I can give away some negative stuff. And in the beginning, when I first got sober, I don't know why. I wanted everybody around me to be sober. And,
I know that.
you know, some people is like, what is wrong with him? I mean, and I realize now the first sponsoree I got, hey, I don't know if I pushed them away or what, but man, it was, we talked every day. We did things together and, but it's nothing like it is now. I would have, knowing what I feel like I know now, I would have approached it differently back then, but it was start. In other words, from back then to now, it's been progression. It's not no perfection.
Well, that's the great thing about AA in general is that there's always new folks coming in so that we always have the opportunity to practice something that we practiced long ago or recently with them. And there's always an opportunity to kind of freshen up and keep our program feeling new. Before we wrap up, I wanted to just ask you, Mike, if there are any things that kind of stick out to you during your period of sobriety, especially from 12 years until right now, things that may have occurred within your sobriety where you might have come close to the edge, or you might have given up, or something very incredible that happened that you know could never have happened without AA. Can you think of a couple of instances like that?
I've had AA and I've had you people, and anything that comes up, first of all, I take it to the power that's greater than me. And then I bring it to you people, especially sponsor.
Yeah.
And really, I've been living the promises. I've went through death in the family. I went through many other diseases. I've went through personal health matters, and I'm just a true believer in meditation and prayer. I believe in God, the power that's greater than myself, and I believe in you people because the answers I ask for, God gives them to you people to give to me. I'm pretty sure that something might happen. I don't know, but I try to keep in that spiritual realm. I try to keep my spirituality to the best of my ability on key, on a card, that if anything arises, I can go through. Some things I've been through can be devastating to others, but they hadn't been devastating to me. It's not like I don't care, but it's like, okay, it's okay. Acceptance for me has been so many things I had to learn to accept.
Yeah, and to me, what you're expressing is that belief that a power greater than yourself is going to handle the situations for you that might otherwise baffle you or send you down the wrong path. That's how it's been for me. And when I look at a man like you and the work you've done in the program, within the context of the life you had leading up to it, and then to see how you are around other people, to me that's a great way to know a man's character, is to watch how he interacts with other people. I see people in this club who just love being around you and who are always glad to see you. I know that's the way I feel about you. And I honor your sobriety in a big way. I'm so happy to have you as a friend and as a brother in the program. And for you to sit down with me today and share with me your life and the truth in your world means a lot to me. And I want to thank you for doing the interview. And my belief is that when others hear it, whether it's next week or in 5 years from now, they will be inspired by the same feeling that I have of having been inspired by your story. So again, I want to thank you for doing this, and I'm looking forward to many, many more meetings and years of our friendship in the program of AA.
Thank you, Howard. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
Well, my friends, that's a wrap for today's episode of AA Recovery Interviews. I want to thank my guest, Mike J., for sharing his story, and thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed the interviews in this podcast series, please share it with others. This show is another helping hand of AA we can all extend to alcoholics everywhere. If you want to contact me directly with any comments, questions, or suggestions, simply email Howard at aarecoveryinterviews.com. Please also take a minute to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And take note, AA Recovery Interviews can now be found on the YouTube Music app. By the way, this podcast strictly adheres to AA's 12 traditions and all General Service Office guidelines for safeguarding anonymity online. I pay all production costs, and no one receives financial gain from the podcast. AA Recovery Interviews and my guests do not speak for or represent AA at large. This podcast is simply my way of giving back to AA, that which has been so freely given to me. The next episode of AA Recovery Interviews is on the way, so keep coming back. It'll be here soon.